Definitely. Yeah.
The last good book I read was a book called Early Bird. Highly recommend it, though. It was about a guy that used to write for, I think, Letterman, and he retired. This is a real guy. And he retired, and he went to Florida and lived in a retirement home. And he just documented his life inside a retirement home, being retired at the age of 35. It was one of the
Wow.
funniest books, and it's weird how the retirement village is like high school. There's like the popular old people, and they have like their cliques and stuff like that, and it's so weird. You kind of go
Wow.
back to that old school thing.
That's hilarious.
Early bird.
Yeah, people are like that, man. They're like that no matter what. They're like that if they're 80. They're like that if they're 180. We're monkeys, man. We were talking about talking and writing, and
Oh, really?
the last guy who got me into writing or reading and writing really. But I read the Great Shark Hunt, the Hunter S. Thompson book. It's kind of a compilation book of all of his stories. Fuck, that dude could write. That dude had some really interesting writing. Like, it got you excited to read more about it. And it's kind of like this weird blend of fiction and nonfiction. That's one of the things that was so cool about Hunter's writing. Is like this guy was just crazy. He was just making all kinds of crazy shit up about like Las Vegas and campaigns and dudes being on drugs. When Ed Muskie was running for president, Hunter Thompson just started printing in Rolling Stone magazine every week that it was like widely known that this guy had an ibogaine addiction and that he was bringing in Brazilian doctors. Like, nobody ever done that before. Nobody ever done like real serious coverage of like a political event and just started adding nutty shit to it that totally wasn't real. So literally, this guy changed the fucking course of the election because that guy was like one of the favorites. And because Hunter's writing about him having an ibogaine addiction, which is this crazy exotic drug from Africa, Hunter wrote this whole thing about it, and this guy literally fell apart on the campaign trail. People were heckling him, and he was doing these campaign speeches and just crumpled just because some crazy shit that this guy wrote. And when they asked him about it, and he goes, "Well, you made up that stuff about Ed Muskie having an ibogaine." He goes, "Well, I didn't make it up. I didn't print it. I said it was a rumor." And he goes, "And it was a rumor, and I started it in Milwaukee." It's just,
No way,
he was
really?
just crazy. He was
That's
just,
funny.
but he got away with it, and he was just constantly on acid. He was constantly doing mescaline. He was constantly doing cocaine. I mean, he was constantly getting fucked up and writing,
That's
like
funny.
super uber fucked up.
Is there a
You
book
know?
or a movie that you would recommend about all this?
Yeah, well, I didn't even get into him until I watched the documentary Gonzo.
Gonzo.
I'd liked the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and I'd seen him on talk shows before, and I always knew that he was this kind of crazy guy. There was this, older dude who was really nutty, liked to shoot guns, and, looked like, your friend's dad, but he was fucking completely psychotic. It was just this guy left over from the 60s that somehow or another morphed into this, like, super violent, fucking drug-addled compound junkie. That's what he used to call himself.
I just added it to my Netflix queue on my
Yeah.
iPad, Joe.
Good job.
Gonzo.
Good job.
See that?
It's a very good documentary. But it's really well made, too, so it really gets you into how fucking interesting this guy was. And it brings me back to the same thing that I always think of, man. I mean, when you're really that good, like, he's so good. Fucking Celebrity Rehab is spectacular.
Oh, it's one of my favorite shows ever.
If you ever wanted, like, motivation to not do drugs, watch Tom Sizemore on Celebrity Rehab.
Dude, not even him. What about that chick? That annoying.
Heidi Fleiss?
No,
The other one.
Yeah, the crazy sex
Yeah,
addict chick.
yeah.
I swear to God, she's one of those girls that they shouldn't even have her on the show because it's just
Yeah.
disgusting
Yeah.
to watch.
She's pretty gross.
I actually ended up liking the girl from that day. What's that? She used to be on that old sitcom that has the dog that died during the show. That wrote the book about being molested.
Oh, Mackenzie Phillips.
I actually
yeah.
liked her by the end
well,
of
she's
it.
a nice person.
Yeah, she seemed
but
cool.
Her whole story's
Horrible.
horrific.
Yeah, it is horrible.
If you don't know the story, Mackenzie Phillips' dad fucked her like her whole life. Like, she had a sexual relationship with her dad, like her whole life. And her dad shot her up with heroin or with cocaine when she was 11.
Jesus Christ.
What?
Ugh.
11, and her dad shot her up with coke. I mean, the whole thing is just the most horrific thing you could ever possibly imagine, that someone would do this to their kid and fuck their kid. Their whole life had a sexual relationship with their kid, and to the point where she told her, like, "Hey, we could leave. We could go to countries where this is totally acceptable." What country is he going to go to?
Right.
What country is it acceptable to fuck your kids?
Right.
Is there one out there?
No, that should be just death.
Jesus Christ.
That should be death.
Yeah, well, speaking of death, the Catholic religion is fighting to. They're trying to impose a statute of limitations on sexual molestation cases.
Oh, really?
Because right now there's a statute of limitations on sexual molestation cases that's like, I believe it's like 30 years. So they're trying to impose. They're trying to make sure that sticks. They want to make sure that they don't change it to no statute of limitations, because then anytime someone has a case right now, if a case is more than 30 years old, I think it's 30 years, pretty sure. If a case is more than 30 years old, you have to, if you're going to be a part of a case, you have to be joining with other people that are also inside the case. So say if someone has a case that's 29 years old and yours is 30 and the same priest fucked you, then you can join in if yours is older.
I see.
But if yours, is the individual case, they're saying they don't want you to be able to sue, and people are saying no, this is crazy.
That's crazy.
And meanwhile, the Catholic Church is urging people to vote against this because they're saying that it's an assault on the church. How is shielding pedophiles with a statute of limitations? How is that fucking helping the church?
Yeah.
And how would getting rid of any statute of limitations that would impose a timeline for when you can be prosecuted for a horrible crime against humanity, how could that be what God wants? That God wants you to...
I'm sick of it, Joe.
Supposed to, it would
turtles can live 1,000 years?
Yeah, there's some tortoises.
No way.
Yeah,
How come I didn't know that?
years.
I watch Discovery all the fucking time.
That was
that on National Geographic? God damn it.
Certain
1,000? Like today,
yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
God damn.
1,000 years old.
Just swimming around.
Damn.
So they literally lived like back when people were writing, like fucking, what was 1,000-year-old writing?
They should put like little black boxes on these fucking, like
They
a
had to
baby
write
journal.
on paper.
Yeah.
They had to write everything out on paper.
Yeah.
Everything was written out. 1,000 years ago, they might have been doing it on animal skins too a lot. That's crazy. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls, that shit was all written on animal skins. Those motherfuckers didn't even know paper. They didn't even have paper back then.
There could be a Dead Sea Scroll on a fucking turtle right now.
Yeah, attached to one.
I know.
Just like snatched.
Saved it on the turtle.
I wish I knew for sure who's telling the truth about the Dead Sea Scrolls, because I don't have enough time to learn ancient Hebrew or Aramaic and go back and read the Dead Sea Scrolls and decipher it for myself. But there's all this dispute on what the Dead Sea Scrolls actually mean. And some people say that it contains all kinds of nutty shit, like fucking UFOs and flying saucers. And I mean, there's guys who have deciphered the Dead Sea Scrolls, like the John Marco Allegro guy says it's all about mushrooms. He said all it was about was them eating the Amanita muscaria mushroom and fertility rituals. And he breaks it all down, like the origins of the words. But people argue against him, and I don't know if who's right. It's too complex.
They should have a fucking live thing on ABC where they all the best scientists on the planet, all the best linguists, they get together. That should be important.
Yeah.
Let's decipher this shit in front of the
Each one
world.
says that.
Live satellite feed from fucking
Well,
France or
Allegro,
something.
I
You know?
believe Allegro passed away. The guy who wrote that book, but he was the one of the head guys deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls. He worked on it for 14 years, and he was the only agnostic in the group. They had a bunch of people that were ordained ministers, and they were the decipherers, and they were all religious people. And he started out a religious person, but when he started studying theology, he realized somewhere along the line this is obviously bullshit, and he just became agnostic. So he looked at the whole picture completely different than all the other guys. They all refuted his findings. But there's a lot of people that say he's right. A lot of people that say that he was the head scholar. He was the number one dude, and he was the guy who had it all right. He was the guy who was looking at it objectively, and everybody else was looking at it with a religious slant. This fucking guy thinks it was all about mushrooms. It was all about psychedelic mushrooms. That they would hide these mushrooms from the Romans, and they would hide like what the magic and what the mushrooms can do. And the way they hid it from them was in stories. And they didn't even write it down for like 1,000 years. They just told each other as a story for 1,000 years. So it just became all fucked up. And so he breaks down like ancient words. Like he broke down the word Christ. He brought it back to an ancient Sumerian word that means a mushroom covered in God's semen.
Nice.
Because when they thought it was raining, they thought God was coming on the earth. That's why things would come up out of the earth. Like cum wasn't bad to them. So, like, when God would reign and he was coming on the earth, these mushrooms would just appear because they didn't have microscopes. They didn't know what a spore is. They couldn't see microscopic things. So they didn't see any seed or anything. And all of a sudden, these big mushrooms appear like the next day. They grow quick. And then they start eating them and they trip their fucking balls out. They don't want anybody else to know about this. So they tried to hide this information. They were told, they were keeping it from their enemies.
Wow.